Good evening, everyone. My name is Erich Pennell. I'm the Membership and Annual Fund Manager here at Tacoma Art Museum. And we have a pleasure to welcome Sarah Munro tonight. I'd just like to start a reminder that if you could please mute your video and your camera during the program. And just a reminder that Tacoma Art Museum sits on Puyallup tribal lands. And without further ado, Sarah.
Well, thank you, Erich, very much. And thank you for listening to those of you who are listening today. I appreciate the opportunity to share Timberline Lodge with you all. Timberline is unique in the country, a lodge for the people, built by public relief workers, furnished with handmade furniture and textiles, decorated with specially commissioned paintings and woodworks. How was this accomplished? Not as the effort of one man, but by combining differing visions of several organizations, the Works Progress Administration, the Forest Service, and a group of private businessmen in Portland. This is the story of the history, art, and craft of an American icon. It is based on my book, published by Timber Press in 2009, which will be self-published in a second edition this fall. Oops, sorry. Emerson J. Griffith became committed to a lodge on Mount Hood built through public works funding. Griffith was Oregon's chairman for the presidential campaign of Democrat Al Smith in 1928 and Roosevelt's campaign in 1932. He was also the state Democratic treasurer in both years. Griffith had been born in California, where he worked as a newspaper reporter and developed a steamship brokerage company. After he moved to Oregon and became a skier, he was aware of local interest in a ski lodge on Mount Hood, but knew that no public funds were available for construction during the Depression. As a prominent Democrat, Griffith went to work on the New Deal. When he was with the Federal Housing Administration in early 1935, he looked into the potential of a Public Works Administration or Reconstruction Finance Corporation loan to a private entity that would construct a lodge. That was unsuccessful. Griffith was appointed to the state administrator for the Works Progress Administration in May 1935 and decided to pursue an application for a lodge on Mount Hood through W.P.A. funding. John Yon, then a young skier, mountain climber, environmentalist, and architect, designed a small lodge at the Timberline that would have extended down the side of the Salmon River Canyon. The photo on the lower right shows a model he made of his design. Jan convinced Griffith that the Timberline site was superior to Government Camp, which was under consideration. Griffith retained architect Pietro Beluschi to modify Jan's designs and contractor Max Lorenz to draw up construction estimates for the application. The Forest Service agreed to be the sponsor on the project. Griffith submitted an application to W.P.A. Administrator Harry Hopkins on September 7th. It included $246,893 for construction, a Forest Service obligation for $8,620 in road construction, and $20,000 in private money from Portland backers of the project. The Forest Service had been planning construction of a lodge since the 1920s. In 1925, Forest Service Recreation Officer Francis Scotty Williamson was the first to identify the Timberline site as ideal for a mountain lodge. Public pressure for a ski lodge was so great that some in the Forest Service feared that the transfer of forest recreational lands to national parks. After the Civilian Conservation Corps was created in 1933, the Mount Hood Forest Service office hired architects to help design recreational facilities that the CCC could build. W.I. Tim Turner was the first of these. Lynn Forrest, Howard Gifford, and Dean Wright, all young architects, were soon added to work on these projects. Tim Turner developed a strong affinity for rustic architecture in national forests and drafted guidelines for ideal forest architecture. He suggested the use of shakes on buildings and lap siding as a building material, natural colored stain on sash and trim, hewn timbers and plank construction on doors and shutters, and use of stone on buildings in alpine areas. Timberline Lodge reflects these guidelines, which were incorporated into early Forest Service designs for the lodge, as you can see in that undated drawing on the slide. On November 5th, 1935, 2 months after the W.P.A. application was filed, a Forest Service administrator articulated the Forest Service vision for the lodge when he voiced concern whether the style of architecture would fit into the mountain background, and also whether services provided to the general public would include low-priced accommodations such as dormitories with bunks. Approval of the W.P.A. application on December 10, 1935 set off a rush to develop final architectural design and construction drawings. In response to telegrams the Forest Service sent to the Washington, D.C. office asking for recommendations for an architect with a national reputation, Gilbert Stanley Underwood was retained. He had designed such national park structures as Ahwahnee Lodge in Yosemite. During the New Deal, he was working for the Treasury Department in Washington, D.C., but his assistant, Stanley Stonecker, came to Portland from Underwood's Los Angeles office in December, and again in January 1936, with the designs shown above that were published in a newspaper to help the businessmen's group, the Mount Hood Development Association, sell bonds to raise $20,000. Underwood's design featured an octagonal-shaped head house with 2 uneven wings extending out, excuse me, at a 90-degree angle. After discussion, the shape of the head house was changed to a hexagon and the height reduced from 90 feet to 70 feet. Most importantly, the lodge was turned around so that the wings angled downhill, preventing snow buildup. The hexagonal head house caused the angle of the wings to be 120 degrees, improving the view for everyone. Underwood contributed the concept of a central head house from which extended uneven wings. There are several precedents for this configuration. One is in LeConte Lodge in Yosemite, and another in a design drawn by Frank Lloyd Wright that was not built at that time. This drawing, completed by Forest Service architect Lynn Forrest, reflects the final design for the lodge, although the circular drive in the front is different. Forest Service architects completed all final design drawings for Timberline. The architectural style of Timberline is rustic, in the tradition of arts and crafts, and is characterized by the use of natural, local materials, wood and stone, blending in with the environment and featuring handmade details in wood and metal. The design is typical, although on a larger scale, of other forest recreation structures. Turner is credited with ascribing the term Cascadian to Timberline's architecture. This term has come to be used more generally, but a contemporary newspaper reporter, Gladys Bowen, and Colonel Hartwell Palmer, the guide and traffic controller at the lodge, both specifically attributed the term to Tim Turner's description of Timberline. The allocation from the Forest Service was used to improve the road from Government Camp and to build the segment from Flock's Point to the Timberline site. This was some of the most difficult work in the entire project. Forest Service employee Captain Jones was in charge of clearing the road. His equipment included an antiquated snow shovel. Spring storms were often so severe that a day's work was obliterated by a night's snow. The work continued because there was a terrific rush to spend allocations before the funds ran out. The memorandum of agreement between the Forest Service and the W.P.A. stipulated that the Forest Service would provide the general design, plans and elevations, and detail architectural plans for the hotel. The W.P.A. was to concur in approval of the general design, plans, and elevations. In addition, the W.P.A. was to hire and pay a general superintendent, foreman, and specialists as selected and designated by the Forest Service. Under this agreement, the workers were supervised by the private contractor, Max Lorenz. Griffith became much more involved in the design than the memorandum of agreement specified. For example, in late spring, Griffith became concerned that the site was too close to the Salmon River Canyon where snow cornices built up, and he requested that the site be moved. So a survey by Forest Service employees was done in May through more than 10 feet of snow, and the builders moved the site about 200 yards to the west of the original plan. This caused no delay or problems with the design. A CCC camp at Summit Meadows, 6 miles below the site, was converted to a W.P.A. camp. The workers were trucked up to the site daily. Albert Aldorfer, in the lower left image, the Swiss trained chef, was proud of the 3 meals a day he served to the workers. Workers' wages ranged between 55 cents an hour for unskilled and 90 cents an hour for skilled, but all the workers paid $1 a day for room and board. Timberline never met the requirements of W.P.A. projects. 90% of the costs were to be labor, 10% materials. Timberline material costs were much higher. Most of the labor was to be for unskilled workers. A higher proportion of skilled workers were required to build the lodge. The hours were to be about 30 per week per worker. Again, exceptions were made for the Timberline project to get the building framed in before winter snows came. There was a perception that the ski lodge was elitist. Finally, repeated applications to the W.P.A. for more funds increased the cost from about $275,000 to over $1 million. Every application to the W.P.A. stated that funds in that application were adequate to complete the project. The Washington, D.C. administrator's concerns over Timberline's budget probably played a role later in the rejection of an application for funding of a fully designed ski chalet adjacent to the lodge. The groundbreaking ceremony was scheduled for June 14, 1936, to be at the same time as the Golden Rose Race and the first international summer ski tournament. Construction began with the wings, and the headhouse was put in between. As you can see in the photo on the right, workers wore no protective gear or helmets. Nevertheless, there were no major injuries and almost no labor disputes. Forest Service engineer Ward Gano remembered that digging for a spring for this water source was done by men from 2 different projects with different pay scales for the same work. Despite grumbling, they all did the work. According to graphs of numbers of workers on the lodge, the peak was about 450 men in September 1936 as builders raced to close the lodge in before winter. Harry Hopkins came on September 14, 1936 to visit the construction site, an event that could be illustrated in this undated photo. The papers reported that he threw a snowball while he was here and that he was pleased with the project. In fact, the administration in Washington, D.C. had serious concerns over discrepancies between requirements for W.P.A. projects and the Timberline project. On October 25, 1936, architect Gilbert Stanley Underwood visited the lodge and expressed satisfaction at the design, and, according to Turner's summary memo, made very few criticisms. Later, Underwood expressed concern over a tendency toward over-sophistication in the lodge. Underwood had recommended emphasizing the nearby pioneer history and designs in the lodge. The focus on pioneers in the decor was identified in the earliest proposals. Griffith was quoted in the newspaper in January 1936. The best artistic talent available will be used to paint murals in all halls and public rooms of the hotel, commemorating the first Oregon pioneers who came across the mountains in the area and lowered their ox carts over the cliffs with ropes. This photo was probably taken on February 25th, 1937, when the Winter Sports Carnival Queen and her court visited the lodge. Throughout construction, Griffith, on the left, continued to express concerns about construction and to propose changes. On June 8, 1936, Griffith called the Forest Service office to ask that more windows be added to the guest rooms. And on March 25, 1937, he requested removal of wall heating units to allow more space for paintings. Both requests were denied. Partway through the construction, Griffith appealed for all public restrooms on the main floor to be removed to limit public use of the main floor. The builders had already installed fittings, so these were left in place and capped. The small mullioned panes in view windows on the mezzanine were changed to large plate glass windows that maximized the view, again at Griffith's request. And Griffith suggested reflecting pools on the north side of the lodge. Local architect John Yon remembered advising Griffith that the interior of the lodge needed a woman's touch and recommended Margery Hoffman Smith for the job. Smith, the daughter of Julia Hoffman, the founder of what became Oregon College of Art and Craft, grew up steeped in the arts with a keen appreciation of crafts and became a professional interior designer. When Smith started on the Timberline project in 1936, the Federal Art Project was identifying artists to create paintings for the walls. Smith worked with the regional art directors on commissioned art for public places in the lodge. In the photo of the Federal Art Project administrators, local administrators on the right, Griffith is at the left. Joseph Danish, the regional art director, headquartered in San Francisco, is next to Griffith. Margery Hoffman Smith is in the center wearing a white jacket. Val Clare, the first head of the Salem Art Center, is at the far right. Not pictured is Bert Brown Barker, who was the first regional art director of the Public Works of Art project for Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and Montana between 1933 and 1934, and the first regional art director for the Federal Art Project from 1935 to 1938. Let's look at the paintings commissioned for Timberline under the Federal Art Project. With one exception, artists commissioned to create works for the lodge created or used illustrated mountain activities rather than focusing on pioneers on Laurel Hill. Darrel Austin visited the lodge on October 1st, 1936 in the company of Griffith, Smith, Turner, Florence Thomas, and Austin's wife, the children's author, Margot Heltzer. During their visit to the lodge, the group looked over wall spaces appropriate for paintings and other art. Subsequently, Austin painted 5 oil paintings illustrating people who could be working or playing on the mountain or in the national forest. All were about the same size, 45 inches tall and 37 inches wide. All 5 were intended to hang on the mezzanine in the hexagonal headhouse at the lodge. These 2, musicians and skier, are shown hanging on the wall on the mezzanine in a W.P.A. photograph of the period on this photo at the left, prior to the opening of the lodge, on a wall where one of the Howard Sewall murals hangs now. The image on the right shows all 5 Austin oils on exhibit at the Portland Art Museum as part of a W.P.A. show. This photo is additional confirmation that all 5 paintings were meant to be hung together as a group. After visiting the lodge in April 1937, Regional Art Director Joseph Danish expressed the opinion that the mezzanine should include artwork by different artists rather than just one. As a result, only musicians and dishwashers stayed at the lodge. The other 3 paintings went elsewhere. The Woodcutters was held at the Portland Art Museum. Fish Story, also known as Fisherman 3, was sent to Tongue Point Naval Station, renamed the Tongue Point Naval Air Station in 1939, and Grant High School. The skier, shown on a previous slide, went to Jefferson High School. All 3 have been loaned back to the lodge, where they now hang on the mezzanine. Stylistic similarities exist among the Timberline artists. Their work is representational, but with elements of abstract art, and Austin's series for Timberline reflects this tradition. These lively, colorful paintings are a perfect complement to the rustic lodge on the mountain. Just before he was commissioned to paint the 5 paintings for Timberline, Austin finished 4 6x8 panels for the University of Oregon Medical School under the W.P.A. Including the Timberline paintings, Austin painted a total of 8 paintings under the W.P.A. On March 18, 1937, C.S. Price visited Timberline with Bert Brown Barker. Margery Hoffman Smith, and a Mrs. Gormley. In a summary memo, Tim Turner stated that the group discussed suitable locations for mural contributions, although, quote, definite choice of location as well as actual production at this time was discouraged. An inspection of the lodge on April 10, 1937, between Smith, Joseph Danish, and Turner resulted in a list of art proposed for the lodge. I will refer to this April 10 memo several times as we discuss the art actually created for the lodge. In the memo, murals 4.5 feet by 10 feet were suggested for end walls of the dining room. It may have been subsequent to this meeting that Price was commissioned to paint murals for the dining room walls. The two large murals that Price painted, Huckleberry Pickers and its companion piece Pack Train, are the two largest paintings Price ever made. He was able to paint these larger, significant works because materials were provided by the Federal Art Project. Price's work bears some stylistic similarities to Austin's, representational but abstracted. In Price's murals, the figures have been rendered in simplified forms, constructed of blocks of color, the mountains built up as solid masses. Although Price's murals were intended for the Cascade dining room, as shown here on the left, they were rejected. They were moved to the offices of the Oregon Art Project about September 1939, where they were hung high on the mezzanine wall, shown on the right. After 1942, when the W.P.A. closed, the murals were in an overnight and recreational facility for servicemen. In 1945, Pack Train went to the Civic Auditorium and Huckleberry Pickers to the Portland Art Museum. Pack Train was rescued from the auditorium furnace room by a janitor and also sent to the Portland Art Museum. When the C.S. Price wing was opened in 1975, Richard Kohnstamm, Timberline ski area operator, wrote to Portland Art Museum director Francis Newton requesting that the murals be returned to the lodge. This was about the time that the nonprofit Friends of Timberline was formed to conserve artworks and restore and recreate furnishings. The Price murals were restored by Portland Art Museum conservator Betty Engel, and they were sent to hang at the C.S. Price wing at the lodge. Perhaps in response to Danish's recommendation for works of multiple artists to be hung on the mezzanine, two smaller oils painted by Price under the Federal Art Project were selected for the collection at Timberline, Mountain Landscape and The Team. Price was the first artist in Oregon to be put on the Federal Art Project rolls. In addition to the 4 paintings at Timberline, 2 of his W.P.A. paintings are at the Multnomah County Library, Indians and Pioneers. 2 murals are at Pendleton High School, 1 is at Beach Elementary in the Portland Public Schools, and others are elsewhere. Price has been memorialized in a portrait by Hank Pander that is in Timberline in the hall leading to the C.S. Price wing. When he received the commission to paint Price's portrait, Pander contacted Price's friends, including Charles Heaney, to learn about Price's work habits and practices. Amanda Snyder had Price's untouched palette in her basement, which Pander put in the painting as a floating table. Pander learned how Price dressed and painted the body as a self-portrait. Pander has said he positioned the moon at an angle that is realistically impossible. Howard Sewall's murals, Symbolizing the Lodge Builder's Metalwork and Symbolizing the Lodge Builder's Woodwork, were installed in the Cascade dining room instead of Price's murals. Both Price and Sewall portrayed people at work on the mountain. Labor was a theme common in W.P.A. era paintings, while Price depicted the age-old work of harvesting huckleberries and the never-ending trek of a pack train. Sewall focused on the labor of lodge builders. Space in Sewall's murals is cleanly divided into triptychs, and figures are stylized. They resemble ancient Egyptian workers clothed only in white loincloths or colored shifts who flank the simplified forms of the W.P.A. metalworker and woodworker. Sewall's use of images from ancient times has the effect of idealizing the common worker. Heavy outlining suggests a similarity to mosaic. Interestingly, the April 10 memo list of artworks identified a mosaic on the ski lobby wall where Sewall's murals were first hung. The resemblance to mosaic in Sewall's murals may possibly have been deliberate. The image at the top left shows the two Sewall murals in the ski lodge, in the lower lobby of the lodge. When the Price murals were removed from the dining room, the Sewall murals replaced them. In the mid-1970s, they were removed and cleaned. Upon their return to the lodge, the Sewall murals were hung on either side of the stairs on the mezzanine. Two other paintings by Sewall are in the art collection at the lodge. Both came after 1975 as donations to Friends of Timberline. In the garden, another W.P.A. work, shown on the upper right here, hangs on the mezzanine and is painted in the same allegorical stylized manner as the original Timberline murals. A small untitled oil, shown on the lower right, perhaps a study for another W.P.A. commission, is a more naturalistic representation of Native people. It hangs in the model room of the Rachel Griffin Historic Exhibition Center. Howard Sewall is pictured on the lower left in what appears to be a class in printmaking under the Federal Art Project. Under the Federal Art Project, he designed and executed silkscreen draperies for the Naval Station at Tongue Point and taught painting at Salem Art Center. In addition, he painted 11 murals for the Imperial Hotel and 16 paintings for Oregon City High School, among other commissions. The last painting commissioned for Timberline under the Federal Art Project was The Mountain by Charles Heaney. On July 20, 1937, Margery Hoffman Smith took Heaney to Timberline to discuss and perhaps allow him to draw sketches for an oil to hang at the lodge. In art historian Roger Hull's biography of Heaney, Hull states that according to Heaney, The Mountain was finished in September 1937 and hung at the lodge in the temporary white frame that he had made for it. Heaney portrayed the mountain thrust up like an enormous block of granite, moved by an earthquake, boulders and river in the front, checkerboard fields in the distance. Similar to Heaney's other work, the mountain makes the landscape dominant, and here, as elsewhere, he included a house or road, something man-made. Hull points out the influence of Price's huckleberry pickers and pack train on the mountain. The angular, blocky forms of Price's horses and figures resemble the angles of Heaney's mountain. The mountain currently is hung in the main lobby by the Cascade dining room. When you're next at the lodge, compare this painting with the small oil of Mount Hood by William Giveler in an alcove of the mezzanine. Richard Kohnstamm purchased Giveler's painting in commemoration of the lodge's 25th anniversary in 1963. The Federal Art Project gave some younger artists confidence that they could make their living through art. This was true for Charles Heaney, who had trained as an engraver and who later attended the Museum Art School. He became a well-known, highly regarded Northwest painter. He completed 64 paintings and 9 woodcut editions under the W.P.A. In addition to commissioned paintings, the earliest plans for the lodge included art in wood. These 2 wood marquetry panels by Aimee Gorham were identified for the first floor vestibule area in Tim Turner's April 10, 1937 memo. Aimee Gorham made a number of wood marquetry panels under the Federal Art Project. Several are still in Portland Public Schools, Alameda, Chapman, Gregory Heights, and Irvington. Gorham's marquetry is also at Oregon State University and the Klamath Falls branch of the U.S. National Bank. Jerome Seliger was her assistant, and he refined a press that put 5 tons of pressure on marquetry that was glued on plywood. In 2020, under a Save America's Treasures grant to Friends of Timberline, conservator Nina Olson assessed the condition of the marquetry panels, arranged for the identification of wood in the panels, and removed the panels to her studio for conservation. The many woods include domestic and exotic species, some no longer available. I have included the Save America's Treasures logo on subsequent slides to indicate other works being conserved under this grant. Florence Thomas accompanied Griffith, Smith, the Austins, and Turner to the lodge on October 1st, 1936, when they discussed the work that she subsequently completed for the lodge. She carved the panel, Cougar Resting in Forest, shown above, that was mounted over the dining room fireplace. The panel did not meet with approval in that location, and in consultation with Joseph Danish, it was removed. Eventually, it was mounted in the main lobby and forms the lintel over the inside front door vestibule. The stylized flora and simplified form of the cougar suggest Art Deco design that was popular in 1930s architecture and is found in many decorative details at Timberline. Thomas also prepared plaster casts of local forest animals that the W.P.A. woodshop used to carve newel posts, such as the bear and pelican shown above. Later, Thomas worked as a designer at Sawyer's Photographic Services Viewmaster Division. The Thomas carving was replaced in the Cascade dining room with this complex scene of local animals carved in 1938 by Erich Lamade, a German immigrant. While Timberline was being built, Lamade was working on other federal art project and section of fine art projects. He was commissioned to paint murals at Grants Pass Post Office, and he worked with several other artists on murals at the St. John's Post Office. It is possible that Lamade was commissioned to carve the Timberline panel after Thomas's cougar was rejected. On the right, he is shown working on murals at Abernathy Elementary School, which were painted over and are just now being recovered through conservator Nina Olson. A small oil of a sawmill by Lamade that was not part of the original collection at the lodge was donated to Friends of Timberline and hangs in an alcove on the mezzanine at the lodge. In the April 1937 memo, administrators and architects of the lodge proposed that 3 covered wagon pieces would be sandblasted in the wall of the stairwell by the front door. Some proposals for sandblasting were later eliminated as W.P.A. funding was running out. Drawings for these panels of pioneers lowering wagons down nearby Laurel Hill were made by Forest Service architects. Instead of sandblasted images, these warm red cedar carvings were created by Valentine Weiss and Melvin Keegan. The only sandblasting remaining at the lodge are 3 symbols sandblasted into the stone chimney in the main lobby. Woodshop supervisor Ray Newfer said that Keegan came into the woodshop one day and carved a block of wood into a ram's head. Margery Hoffman Smith liked it so much she decided to use it for a table base and asked him to carve another. An additional carved ram's head surfaced in the last 10 to 15 years. Friends of Timberline acquired it, commissioned another one to be carved, and created a second ram's head table for the lodge. Another artwork listed in the April 1937 memo was a mosaic at the entrance to the lodge. Flora and fauna of the Alpine region were illustrated in the glass mosaic that surrounds the drinking fountain. Spring on the Mountain was designed by Thomas Lehman, an administrator in the Oregon Art Project office, as well as an artist. Although reuse and recycling was a theme in much of the lodge construction, Tom Lehman ordered cathedral glass specifically to use in Spring on the Mountain rather than using leftovers from the Blue Ox Bar glass. Tom Lehman is in the photo at the top right. The photo on the lower right shows a version of this mosaic on the floor in front of Federal Art Project workers who appear to be listening to a talk. Artist Martina Gangle is at the far left in the front row. Lehman assisted Robert Stackpole on sculpting granite pylons in front of the San Francisco Stock Exchange and painted murals in the San Mateo Post Office, among other projects under the Federal Art Project. A bar was not even part of the original plan for the construction drawings. A memo by Tim Turner dated March 25, 1937 stated that, quote, Need of a bar to be incorporated somewhere within the ski lounge area has been mentioned by Mrs. Ferdinand Smith, and she has Mr. Griffith's approval for this item. Over Forest Service objections, a small, narrow space originally planned for wood storage was selected for the bar. On November 6, 1937, Turner wrote a memo stating that Max Lorenz had informed him that money previously allocated for the purchase of materials had not been spent, and Turner suggested that would provide $5,000 to decorate the bar. This funding probably covered glass murals for the bar and may have also paid for the carved and painted linoleum panels in the ski grill. Virginia Darcy was selected to decorate the walls of the bar and chose the theme of legendary Paul Bunyan and Babe the Blue Ox for the 3 glass murals. Inspired by Mexican muralist Diego Rivera, Darcy created murals in opus sectile, an ancient mosaic technique where the artist uses glass, stone, or mother of pearl cut in large pieces to shape areas of the design. The W.P.A. photo on the right shows Virginia Darcy and Charles Haller assembling the murals. Darcy also completed a mural for the Oregon City Library under the W.P.A. She was fortunate to return to repair her work at the Lodge in 1976. Douglas Lynch's linoleum panels, the calendar of mountain sports, decorate the room that was originally the ski grill. Like the Paul Bunyan murals, these linoleum panels were started in 1938 at the end of the construction of the Lodge. When Margery Hoffman Smith found him, Lynch was working as a window display designer for Meyer and Frank department store, where he and his friend John Blue had just completed a window display of carved and painted linoleum murals with a Western theme. The subjects of the 12 panels of the calendar of mountain sports were activities pursued in the mountains through the year, such as the snowshoeing photographer illustrated here on the left. Some figures in the panels are people Doug knew, such as Thomas Sherrard, longtime Mount Hood forest supervisor, and Harry Wentz, a well-known art teacher at the museum art show, illustrated at the right, sketching. The panel of the fly fisherman, shown in the upper right, and 2 other panels were removed from the back wall when the ski grill was remodeled and stored in the attic under mattresses. They were discovered chipped, cracked, soiled, and with faded glazing. When they were repaired and rehung, Doug requested that they be left unglazed. There's a great contrast between the 9 painted panels and the 3 where the glazing wore off. Doug Lynch is shown in the photo on the left. He was a graphic artist who created the graphic arts curriculum at the Museum Art School and had his own design practice. He also created the City of Portland's flag, which is shown in the middle. All guest rooms have botanical watercolors or hand-colored lithographs such as these. Over 150 botanicals were created through 1937 and early 1938 as decorations for guest rooms at the Lodge. The 1937 memo identified these. Dora Erickson was probably in charge of the project. Other artists included Edward Benedict, Martina Gangle, Carl Fuhrer, George Jeffrey, and Elizabeth Hoffman Smith, who was Margery Hoffman Smith's niece. All of the artists created compositions of local alpine wildflowers and trees. Once the botanical accuracy was confirmed, a lithographic print may have been made that another artist might have hand-painted. Fuhrer created the composition of skunk cabbage on the upper left and noble fir in the lower left, and Erickson created the alpine fir on the right. Identifying the artists of these was difficult because the botanicals were not signed on the front. Through a grant to Friends of Timberline from the Kinsman Foundation, we were able to remove all of these works from the wall with conservator Elizabeth Chambers to assess their condition. We found on the backs of many, the name of the artist and the day or days and the month that the work was completed. When the Lodge opened in 1938, Holger Cahill, National Director of the Federal Art Project, sent a group of W.P.A. watercolors and prints E.J. Griffith's request. Of the 25 works that were received, several didn't stay at the lodge. The others became part of the collection and hang in guest rooms or in alcoves on the mezzanine. Included are 2 watercolors by the California regional plein air painter, George Post. One is Winter at Soulsbyville, California, shown at the upper left of this slide. Another is Algoma, the lower left, a watercolor by Edmund Lewandowski, who was identified with precisionism, a movement in which objects are depicted realistically, but with an emphasis on their geometric form, such as the rectangular windows, triangular roof lines, and hemispherical boat prow in this painting. Lewandowski painted post office murals in Wisconsin, Illinois, and Minnesota. The 2 works pictured on the right are gouache on board. Arthur Carrick, who painted Prairie Farm Dam in the upper right, was known as a regionalist. Although he is primarily known as a Minneapolis artist, Carrick was commissioned to paint landscape scenes in a courthouse and post office in Anchorage. Another regionalist was the Italian-born Louis Bossa, who painted Pennsylvania landscape on the lower right. He finished it in 1938, just about the time he moved from New York to Pennsylvania. Elizabeth Colwell's still life of tulips and lilacs, which is not illustrated, is also part of the collection. Cahill also sent lithographs, wood engravings, and etchings such as those shown on this slide to the lodge. New Mexico Village in the upper left is an etching by Jean Kloss. Mabel Wellington Jack's lithograph Speedboat on the lower left was made under the New York Federal Art Project. It featured scenes of contemporary life, here showing different forms of motorized transportation that are contrasted with gulls flying overhead. Spring is a wood engraving by Minnie Lois Murphy in the upper right. Sweeping the Snows of Petrushka is a lithograph by Kira Markham, produced under the Federal Art Project in New York. Even though these works were not produced in the Northwest, they are well within the New Deal tradition. Elizabeth Chambers completed an assessment of these works under the Save America's Treasures grant, providing Friends of Timberline with conservation recommendations. Margery Hoffman Smith played an integral role in the selection for and placement of original art at the lodge, but her focus as the assistant director of the Oregon Federal Art Project was on craft. Perhaps her involvement in the then Oregon Society of Art and Craft gave Smith a special appreciation for craft in the state. The potential for craft during the New Deal was fully expressed at Timberline in wood furniture, metal furnishings, and textiles. Griffith embraced Smith's vision and concentration on craft, even though at the outset of the project, he had stated his goal of having the best art in the lodge. He decided that all the furniture at the lodge would be provided through the Federal Art Project and informed the Forest Service of this by October 1st, 1936. This commitment represented a major expansion of the Timberline project and required additional applications to the W.P.A. for funding. One internal Forest Service memo stated that it was not clear how much furniture could be produced under the Federal Art Project and suggested that the Forest Service wait to send out a prospectus for potential operators until they knew what the operator would have to supply. Ultimately, the lodge was fully furnished through the Federal Art Project. Despite Forest Service concerns, the vision came together. As a brief tour of Timberline's furniture, metalwork, and textiles will show. The head house is the most distinctive feature architecturally and reflects a pioneer theme. Beams extend out from the stone chimney like a wagon wheel with decorative iron strapping. The mezzanine railing and the post and rail on the floor of the main lobby resembles corrals. Lamp bases look like branding irons. Furniture repeats the shape of the hexagonal head house in angular couches and hexagonal oak coffee tables. Note the sandblasting symbol on the upper right of the chimney. This and 2 others are the only pieces remaining of sandblasted decor at the lodge. Stonemasons worked on the 500-ton stone chimney and exterior facing using andesite collected locally. Many were Italian immigrants who had learned their skill in Italy, and some built stone walls at other sites, including tunnels in Portland and stonework at Rocky Butte. The 6 ponderosa pine columns were hand-hewn by Henry Steiner for the price of $25 each, and workmen to turn the logs. The lodge interior was characterized by a curved arch called the Timberline Arch, but more commonly known as the Haystack Arch. It was repeated throughout the building in doorways. Smith took this already designed architectural element and used it in the furniture. She used the Timberline Arch in the wood dining room chairs, as is illustrated here in reproduction and original chairs now on the mezzanine. Smith later said she was not happy with the design, but that the best thing to do with a design you don't like is to repeat it, and from the repetition gain a rhythm and pattern that the single design does not possess. The woodworking shop was supervised by Ray Newfer, who worked closely with Margery Hoffman Smith. The Timberline project was on such a fast track that construction of a piece of furniture often preceded executing the design for it. Sometimes an example of a piece of furniture was made and not duplicated. With the exception of the mezzanine alcove desk seen in the upper right photo here, furniture for the main lobby, the mezzanine, and the guest rooms differed in style from the bar stools and booths in the ski grill and the fiddleback chairs in the Blue Ox bar. These very heavy pieces with extensive handwork and carving were designed by Forest Service architects. The original ski grill bar stools were designed by Tim Turner, according to Margery Hoffman Smith, and they are unfortunately no longer in existence. All the furniture at the lodge is substantial, but compare the weight of the furniture on the previous slide with these examples that appear more streamlined and have more superficial carving and Art Deco details, such as the zigzag carving on the love seat. Items on the left are one of a kind at the lodge, and very few pairs of the hinged twin beds and wheelbarrow love seats were created. The Year and Moons page in a Campfire Girls handbook belonging to Howard Gifford's daughter was the inspiration for some carved designs on overhead doorway lintels in the lower lobby, the weather vane on the head house, and some exterior carving. Symbols in the center of this diagram on the right were not in the Year of Moons page. They were also used on lower lobby lintels and the lintel over the front door at the lodge. Turning from wood to metal furnishings, andirons and light fixtures provide examples of hand-wrought ironwork at the lodge. Recycling and reuse of materials was demonstrated in fireplace screens that were made of old truck tire chains. The spiral andirons in public area fireplaces were made from recycled railroad rails. Another example of recycling is in the newel posts. They were recycled telephone poles that had cost $2.10 each. The photos of the owl and eagle, I didn't show those two actually. The design of the sleek spiral andirons is different from the folksy woodland animal andirons in the guest room fireplaces, like the squirrel andiron here. Both suggest Art Deco lines, but the squirrel is also rustic in feeling. The two light fixtures reflect also two different focuses in design. The hexagonal globe fixtures of the main lobby are contemporary in feeling, while the iron frame lantern type fixtures in the lower lobby are more traditional, suggesting pioneer lantern shapes. The 1,000-pound wood front door with the ram's head door knocker, the enormous front door handle, and the decorative metal hardware provide a study in metal furnishings at the lodge. One of the blacksmiths, Henry Harth, pictured on the lower left, kind of the center left, the center lower picture, was a teenager during the New Deal and was a member of the National Youth Administration. He was also sent to the Oregon Society of Art and Craft to create a brass punch bowl and a platter with pine cone handles, pictured at the right, for use in the dining room. This collaboration must have been arranged through Margery Hoffman Smith. One of the hopes of the Federal Art Project was to launch workers into craft careers. It happened that artists were launched into careers as artists, but not for craftspeople. Harth worked for years for the Portland Parks Bureau, but not as a blacksmith. The most impressive metalwork in the lodge are the Cascade dining room gates. Smith worked with Orion Benjamin Dawson, supervisor of the W.P.A. metal shop, to design the wrought iron gates to the dining room. Dawson remembered completing the gates in a great rush to be in time for the dedication of the lodge by President Franklin Roosevelt. Dawson was not satisfied with the lightning bolt and half moon motif on the borders, shown on the left, which he felt was not suitable for wrought iron. These simplified and geometric motifs suggest contemporary Art Deco details and may reflect the influence of Margery Hoffman Smith. Hand-wrought iron is one of the most distinctive crafts demonstrated at Timberline. Blacksmiths continue to be interested in creating by hand fireplace forks, lampstands, handrails, and other metal objects as needed for the lodge. There is a chain of craftsmen among Timberline blacksmiths, from Obie Dawson through retired Eastern Airline pilot Russell Moggins on the right to Darrell Nelson at his forge in Eatonville, Washington, who still creates hand-forged iron pieces for the lodge. Finally, the textile project provided hand-woven or applique draperies for the public areas of the lodge, hand-woven material for upholstery of wood or wood and iron furniture, and hand-hooked rugs in the main lobby. In addition, over 20 room schemes were developed for textiles for guest rooms. Some were botanicals, such as the Solomon Seal Room, illustrated here on the left. Designs like forest and stream on the right celebrate the mountain environment of Timberline. The covered wagon, not illustrated here, is a nod to the pioneer theme at the lodge. There are 72 guest rooms, but there were closer to 50 in 1938. All were decorated in variations of the 20 designs memorialized in design books. There was a page for each guest room that specified the proper bedspread, draperies, and rug. In the early stages of the textile project, it was hoped that Oregon-grown flax could be used for textiles at Timberline, but that was not feasible in the end. The textile projects were completed through the Women's and Professional Project. Since only one family member was allowed employment under the W.P.A., the women who worked on the project were mostly single, widowed, or divorced. 78% of the women on the project in Oregon were employed as seamstresses. There is one Black woman hooking a rug in the photo in the upper left, only one. In 1975, a funding mechanism similar to the New Deal provided for recreation of textiles at Timberline, where most of the originals had worn out. The Comprehensive Employment Training Act, or CETA, allowed the formation of a textile workshop to recreate textiles for the lodge. Emulating the W.P.A., only 10% of the allocation was allowed for materials, and the rest of the funding covered labor. Marlene Gable, Portland artist, craft person, and teacher, organized the workshop. Linnie Adamson replaced her as director of the CETA project and became curator of the lodge in 1979. Adamson is pictured in both photos at the right. The photo on the lower right shows the model room, part of the Rachel Griffin Historic Exhibition Center that was created to honor Rachel Griffin, who devoted herself to Timberline after she retired as curator at the Portland Art Museum. As a founding member of Friends of Timberline, she directed its early restoration efforts. Manuel Izquierdo made the bust of Rachel at the lower left for the exhibition center about 1985. President Franklin D. Roosevelt came to Oregon to dedicate Bonneville Dam and Timberline Lodge on September 28, 1937. Griffith orchestrated the event with Oregon politicians and involved the Federal Theater and music projects in the entertainment. When President Roosevelt and Eleanor arrived at the lodge, the elevator was in service so that Roosevelt could come to the terrace on the main floor to deliver the dedication address. The lodge was not open to the public, but room 107, pictured above right, was assigned to Eleanor Roosevelt for her use. Ray Newfer made a special chair, pictured in the lower right photo, with arms in the W.P.A. woodworking shop for FDR to use at lunch in the main lobby after the dedication. No designs had been executed for the chair, and Newfer said they made it over the weekend before the dedication. After lunch, as the group looked around, Eleanor Roosevelt expressed admiration for the handmade furniture and furnishings and asked if the same kind of project could be organized elsewhere. Soon the group left for the train station in Portland. Interior furnishing continued through the fall of 1937. The lodge opened in February 1938 in a snowstorm. It had been designed, built, and furnished in just over 2 years. The Magic Mile chairlift was built the next year on the east side of the lodge. Its terminus was Silcock's Hut, named after Ferdinand Silcox, chief of the Forest Service, who was instrumental in supporting both construction of the lodge in 1935 and the chairlift before he died in 1939. Timberline Lodge, Inc., a company made up of some members of the Mount Hood Development Association, operated the lodge until 1942, when it was closed for the duration of World War II. After it reopened in 1945, times had changed. Skiing had become more and more popular. An additional bar was added on the mezzanine in 1950, and soon gambling was introduced. A subsequent operator did not provide needed maintenance or pay bills. Sandy Electric Co-op turned off the electricity on February 18, 1955, and everyone left the lodge in darkness. The Forest Service revoked the permit. Richard L. Kohnstamm became Timberline's operator and reopened the lodge during the summer of 1955. In this portrait by Hank Pander, which hangs at the lodge, Kohnstamm is holding a model of the lodge in his hand, signifying his devotion to it. He was truly the man who saved Timberline Lodge. It wasn't always easy. In 1975, he was inspired by a Seattle visitor's suggestion to form a support group. Mr. Kohnstamm convinced his friend Jack Mills to form the nonprofit Friends of Timberline to raise funds for art restoration and furnishings recreation. Friends of Timberline has raised funds for several major improvements, including restoration of the amphitheater, completion of Light Up the Lodge and Light Up the Art projects to bring lighting up to current standards and to accentuate the art, conducting a design competition and fundraising for the winter entrance, and restoration of reflecting pools on the north side of the lodge. The C.S. Price Wing is open for special events on Mount Hood, in the Mount Hood or Mount Jefferson rooms, or the Raven's Nest Bar. Price's precious murals hang high on the wall in the main entrance to the wing. In several regional and several additional works of art have been added, including Tom Hardy's arc-welded steel sculpture of ravens, Paul Buckner's Pioneer Woman and Child, shown here, and Indian Woman and Child, its companion, which were created out of Alaska yellow cedar, and Leroy Setziol's untitled Alaska yellow cedar carving, which hangs on the terrace outside the C.S. Price Wing. This rustic lodge is of wood, Douglas fir, ponderosa pine, hemlock, Oregon oak, cedar, and stone, andesite found on the slopes of the volcano. Its art includes paintings, carvings, marquetry, and mosaics, carved linoleum, and works on paper from the New Deal period. Its rustic furnishings and furniture are in wood and hand-wrought iron, and the hand-sewn, woven, and hooked textiles. Altogether, the lodge embodies art and craft of the 1930s, rustic and Art Deco. Outside of a museum, Timberline Lodge is the only place in America where one can view such variety in public works creation. Only at Timberline can a visitor stay in an operating hotel that feels like a museum. Built by combined efforts of the W.P.A., the Forest Service, and private business, maintained by public, private, and nonprofit interests, this national historic landmark is truly the People's Lodge. Timberline, the icon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that presentation. If we could take a moment if anyone have any questions.
Hi, I have a question.
Go ahead.
Okay, sorry. I'm wondering why they decided to not install the restrooms, why they wanted to keep the public out of the main lobby area.
I think it was, well, they had no idea at that time, of course, how many people would be in the lodge like there are today. But I think that that Griffith kind of felt that he wanted this to be, he never articulated this in anything I read, but more like a chateau in Europe, or one of the ski lodges might have been in Europe, and he wanted it to preserve that experience for the people who were staying in the guest rooms. And then, of course, the flip side of that was that the Forest Service wanted to be sure that there was access for everybody, that it was this public building and everyone should be able to be everywhere in the lodge. And it's been kind of a compromise of both of those, but I think that was the impetus for not completing the restrooms.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sure.
Any more questions?
I've got one if you don't mind.
No, of course.
Sarah, which is your favorite work of art that you spoke about this evening? Either a work of art or a more decorative art object?
I think my favorite thing at the lodge is the C.S. Price mural of the Huckleberry pickers. I just love it. I feel it. I love the colors that are in it and the feeling of it. And I think it's one of the most special artworks in the state.
Oh, I love that. Thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Sarah?
Yes.
Hello. Hi, this is Patty McMahon. This is just a very specific question for you. You mentioned the name Paul Buckner.
Yes.
Can I ask who that was?
He was an art professor at the University of Oregon. And he's now deceased, but he was asked to do those two carvings because Florence Thomas, the woman who had designed the cougar in the forest and the Newell head carvings, had also drawn up some other artworks that were kind of suggested for the lodge, but weren't ever executed. And they were included in a book. It's a rare book that shows illustrations of things at Timberline before it was even completed. Those drawings of those two sculptures, Pioneer Woman and Child and Indian Woman and Child, were in that book. And so Paul Buckner was commissioned to make those carvings out of that Alaska yellow cedar.
Mm-hmm. How do you spell his last name?
Buckner.
C-K-N-E-R.
There's quite a bit about him on the internet.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Sure, thanks for asking.
Any more questions?
Sarah, can you hear me?
Yes.
What is the best publication about the Timberline Lodge currently available?
Oh, golly. Well, my book that this talk was based on is going to be, it's out of print, the 2009 version. It's titled exactly what the title of this talk was, Timberline Lodge, The History, Art, and Craft of an American Icon. And the reason I mentioned that one is that that covers the art and the craft. And there's an inventory of all the artwork in the lodge. There are other books about New Deal and so forth. The catalog for this exhibition is a wonderful resource too for W.P.A. art, just fabulous. It's a great exhibit. I'm sorry I can't think of anything else.
That's okay. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you. Any more questions? Well, I just want to thank you everyone for attending tonight's virtual program. And I just want to make a plug, as you see in the comments and chat, that we do have another event going on tonight in the Spirit Festival. Starts today. It'll be going on for the next few weeks. And we have a contemporary native art jury conversation and awards. You can click on the link to find more information. And we do have another member event on September 30th. It will be a virtual palette sign workshop from 6 to 7:30. So please sign up. More information can be found on those programs on our website, tacomaartmuseum.org. I'd like to thank Sarah for doing the program tonight, and thank you all for attending.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.